Hi everyone, it's Sketcher Fashion Drawing Tutorials, and in this lesson we're going to render this beautiful Alexis Mabille dress. I start from the basic pose of a model walking on a catwalk, and as you can see, just in the middle I'm drawing this V shape above her chest to show the upper edge of her body's part. And she's going to have buttons just in the middle on the waistline. And here is some sort of lapel that her dress has. And let's show the sides of the chest as well. So here is the first big fold. And first I want to erase her legs so you can see all the details. So it goes a bit to the side, and here we have this wave. Now I will draw just general shape of the folds, and then I will fix it when outlining. The shape of the skirt is resembles a bell. So it has a huge gathering of a quite thick fabric at the waistline, so we have volume on the sides. So it's always about fixing, just, changing things. So I think this edge should be a bit less lifted. The folds are cascading. They are a bit lifted in the front, in the middle, and they gradually become lower on the sides and at the back. So one more fold on the right side, a bit narrower. So let's make a more or less symmetric shape on both sides. Here I'm checking, so it looks like it's corresponding on both sides. Sometimes it's reasonable to start drawing on a draft paper and then trace it to the clean marker paper, but right now I'm drawing on marker paper because I just find that the shape is not that complicated. So I just added pockets below her waistline, and now I'm drawing her sleeves, adding some folds at her elbow and adding some buttons. After you finish drawing, just trace everything. So I start coloring her skin, and I picked ivory color as the base. And now I'm just leaving the most highlighted places. The nose bridge, then the middle part of her forehead, cheekbones, just everything that is prominent. And next I'm using satin, which is a bit darker, and coloring the bottom of her nose, sides of forehead, sides of her nose. When anything is elevated, the top is light, but the sides are darker, so we should show those darker parts. Next I'm using dusky pink, which is even darker. So you can use the same skin tone and just layer it, but that's how I actually do most of the time. I use several markers. Leonardo da Vinci wrote in his memoirs that the goal of the artist is to separate the object from the background with shadows, and that's what we are doing right now. So next I'm using purple pencil, and intensifying the shadows, making this look more dramatic. If you like soft look, you can actually avoid using outline and avoid using this shadows, because it adds contrast and make this a bit dark look. So everywhere where we're supposed to have some extra shadows, I'm adding purple pencil. It works for lighter skin. For darker skin, we use a dark brown pencil. Next, I'm going to work with the 3 blues, like midnight blue is a dark one, and cornflower is something in the middle. It's still light blue, but a bit darker than blue pearl that we're going to use as the lightest blue. So I'm adding these spots to show very subtle depressions on the fabric. And next I'm using blue pearl, which is going to be the lightest blue. So blue pearl is the lightest blue, cornflower is, let's call it mid blue, and midnight blue is a dark blue. So now, after coloring everything with a light blue, I'm using midnight blue. Adding it mostly on the sides. For every this segment of this dress, I add this darker blue, mostly on the sides and also inside of the deep creases. Like if we have some fault like here at your elbow, inside I'm coloring with midnight blue. So because that's the main color of the dress, but because of strong highlights, we have this super light blue in the middle. So now I'm using cornflower, which is medium blue, and coloring around this dark blue area to build the transition. So dark blue doesn't look, it's not too separated from the light blue. So next I'm using black pencil and adding extra shadows under the lapel. Next, with a black fine line pen, you can pick any thickness, doesn't matter, just need something that is thinner than marker. I'm outlining those buttons, you can color partially them, and with white ink gel pen, adding some highlights on the buttons and on the thin folds at the elbow. Some of them you don't have to add on all of them, and just showing the part where the fabric is folded in order to form this lapel. It's quite shiny for shiny fabrics. So this is how I drew the lower part. As you can see, it's just fabric folded. So it goes like this. The first fold that we drew, then you make this turn, you make this line, then turn, and this is the outer edge on the left, and we have overall bell shape. And here the same story, but a smaller fold, then it goes to the second fold, we continue it up, and then here, you lock it, and then you go to the side and you just add this lower folds at the back, and you can see they're all related. Left side should continue and be part of the right side. So now I'm using cornflower, and again, as with the upper part, I'm showing any creases on the fabric. So fabric is not that stiff usually, because if you imagine a car body which is firm, and when you imagine the highlights, they are more predictable. They follow the shape of the car, they are smooth. But with the dress like this, there are many small depressions of the fabrics because it is soft. That's why we show them with this mid blue, which is cornflower in our case. I add shadows, and as you can see, they still tend to be located on the sides of the folds. Inside of the folds, you can see those drop folds just below your waistline. We add shadows inside. And here we will have a thread line. Their fabric is a little bit pleated because of the tension. So now I'm coloring everything with a blue pearl, our lightest value. Okay, some cornflower. Next I'm using midnight blue, and I'm not adding it everywhere that I want. As you can see, I'm coloring inside of this already darker area, mostly on the sides of the folds, inside, and everywhere where it's supposed to be darker. Because usually the middle part of the folds is a bit prominent and it gets more of the light. And I always color with a cornflower, which is a mid blue, around midnight blue. And I use the pearl blue only when I need to add just subtle shadows. So basically I'm working with 3 markers. I add midnight blue to show really deep shadows inside of these folds, and to separate those folds from each other. And then I use cornflower to build the transition from dark blue to light one. Here I use blue pearl in the beginning to build a wet surface for midnight blue, so when it's applied it blends a little bit. So you can use a lighter marker to build this wet surface. Because when the surface is wet, you can use midnight blue, then apply cornflower. They will build together a really soft gradient, rather than if you apply these markers and in between you wait till each layer dries. So if you make fast strokes, they will blend into each other. So I'm repeating myself over and over again, but I hope you can see what's happening, and I hope you're trying to work a bit faster to layer them while they're still wet and you see the results. Usually on the catwalk there is a light from the top, and lower part, the hemline, is a bit darker. We have shadows separating folds, we have shadows at the bottom, we will have shadows inside the folds. This is quite intuitive process because the way that I change different markers is just to build this soft transition. So I use one, then I use another one, I try to be fast. Inside we have very little of highlights, so I'm just leaving a small spot. You see the way I colored the hemline, like tiny shapes to show the pleating. Next I'm using Ice Gray 5, also to show some wrinkles on the dress, darken a bit the hemline. Next Ice Gray 3, something in between. Ice gray really works for colors like blue or cold green, because cool gray is actually a bit warm. So I prefer ice gray to make shadows on really cold hues. And also if you show white fabric, like let's say wedding dress, I prefer using ice gray one rather than cool gray one. So now I'm using black and adding super dark shadows. So inside, between deep folds. Now using midnight blue to build the transition from black to blue. Cool gray 5. Cool gray 5 is close to black, but it's kind of a light version of black. It's also very useful to show the shadows, the way that they come from black to light values of gray. Next, I'm using white ink gel pen and show some really sharp folds on the top. So mostly those ones that are close to her pockets. The edge of the pockets. And adding extra shadows with the black pencil. Black pencil it just gives this texture of pencil, which I love. Plus it's quite thin, so you can add shadows inside of really tiny wrinkles. And again, by controlling the pressure, you can make also transition from darker to lighter area. With charcoal pencil, I'm adding highlights on these many folds at the bottom where we have the thread line. And actually, let's add more of blue on this big fold. So I'm adding midnight blue. Let's darken a bit the edges to separate it from the background. And the thread line, actually, I'm drawing it as a dashed line with a white ink gel pen. So cornflower, just darkening some area, working with the other half of your skirt. In a similar way, I'm going just to add a bit different shadows. Here you can see this is very common way of adding shadows around drop folds. So you keep this U shape, which is the top of the fold, and around it you add the shadow. So next I'm adding shadows on the sides of each fold. And pay attention that I'm not applying shadows as like just stripes or triangles. They all have irregular shapes which make the look more natural. And again, I'm coloring everything with one layer of blue pearl. Okay, so we're going to work in a similar way with the second half. I'm going to start commenting only when we have some new step, but remember that I use midnight blue and then I add cornflower, which is slightly darker light blue, and then I try to make the gradient, the change from dark blue to lighter blue, very smooth by mixing these markers. Ice gray 3. Next, using some black. And then black pencil for the shadows that are thin. And with charcoal pencil, adding in some places highlights where I lost them. But try not to lose your highlights, so be careful, because you cannot 100% bring them back with a pencil. Since pencil is a bit noisy, it's not very smooth. More of the shadows with black pencil. Again, adding some strong highlights on the top of drop folds. Just bringing back some details with black fine liner. I want to add some violet on the right side to the dark blue that we already have. So I'm coloring on the sides of the folds, on the side of the skirt, just to give a different tint to the shadows. Ice gray 3. Extra shadows, darkening the hem area. Working with the interior of the skirt. Darkening the border between dark blue and light blue. And showing the thread line. So extra shadows with black pencil. So shadows because of the overlapping. And these small pleatings on the hemline. So I'm drawing them along the thread line and along the hemline with just tiny strokes. I hope you're watching in a full screen mode so you can see all the details. Inside I'm coloring with Ice Gray 5. Just leaving some highlights too, because their fabric is also folded and has some prominent parts that are a little bit lighter, so we need to separate them a bit. We should remember that inside has some gradation in values too. So now I'm using Cool Gray 5, mostly darkening the upper parts of this interior. So I'm adding some blue, starting with blue pearl, then cornflower, ice gray 3, Cool Gray 5, midnight blue, adding those spots, wrinkles at the hemline, then showing the thread line with a black pencil, ice gray 3, and again showing some wrinkles along the thread line and along the hemline. Let's outline her legs. And again, on the other side, I'm starting with the blues, the lightest one. The back part is going to be dark, so I'm coloring it with Cool Gray 5. Okay, let's start from midnight blue. Leaving some pad of light. And just working the same way. Ice gray 3, building the transition, adding the thread line, adding the wrinkles, and so on. Adding extra shadows with black pencil. And here on her shoes we have stones that I'm drawing using fine line pen, just like rounded rectangles, and draw them a bit like beyond the outline of her feet. The front of her shoes. And then outline everything I'm using patty color. You can use dusky pink or any marker that you used for the shadows on your skin. So I'm just coloring the sides of your legs, of your feet, then coloring everything with the ivory. The light marker. Next, extra shadows on the sides. With warm gray 5, I'm adding shadows under her skirt on her skin. So all warm grays work perfectly for the skin because skin has warm color. As before I told you, ice gray works perfect for blues, and the warm grays work good for warm colors. So just a bit more of the skin tone. Adding some pear green to the stones in the middle. And as a base for her shoes, I'm using lavender pro marker. Adding a bit of orchid. And some grays, like ice gray 2 or 3 on the sides for the shadows. I'm drawing soles of her shoes with black fine liner. And some highlights on the stones with white ink gel pen. And using purple for the shadows. Okay, so I want to have a really dark and dramatic makeup, so I'm using purple pencil and also using some violet pencil. I'm really pushing hard on the top of your eyelid and pushing less as I go up. I'm also coloring the lower eyelid too. And just darkening the bottom of your nose. So separating your body from the background, along the outline, coloring with pencil. And now I'm using sandstone as the base for your hair, adding glitter with white dots on your eyeshadows. And now using warm gray 5 and just partially coloring. I'm leaving a bit of highlights in some parts, like just the middle of your hair, and then using brown pencil, adding this hairy texture, and with black pencil darkening the shadows, like below your buns, or I even don't know what I drew myself, is bun or just adding some hair on the sides sticking out. And we're almost done with this tutorial. Wow, this was really long. It actually took much longer. I squeezed it, I cut everything out, and that's what we have. The juice of this process. I hope you liked it. Please share your questions and suggestions, and it would be cool if you try to draw something like that with using different hues. Alrighty, subscribe to Sketcher channel for more tutorials, and see you very soon.